research paper on the toxic algae blooms in Wisconsin. In recent years, uh, algae blooms in Wisconsin have been increasing in numbers, and there's a lot of factors that go into it as far as what enables an algae bloom to grow, what makes it toxic, and what can we do about it. For starters, there are several varieties of algae. Kelp, seaweed, phytoplankton, and cyanobacteria are four of the most common. Um, Not all of them are toxic. They don't all create toxins. The cyanobacteria one is the one that is often referred to as blue-green algae, and that is the one that produces the toxin. In general, algae are an important part of the food web as a food base for most of the aquatic life, and algae also are important oxygen producers in our environment. Um, Blue-green algae can produce different toxins that affect the nervous system and the liver. Symptoms can be vomiting, you can get rashes, breathing problems, along with many other things. And the toxins don't just affect humans; they also can infect or affect animals as well. Um, Warm weather, warm water, calmer winds, and plentiful nutrients are what provide the algae for the perfect environment to grow. Um, al- Algae blooms have also caused an impact on Wisconsin's tourism industry. Wisconsin relies heavily on tourism in the summer months, and a lot of our tourism is based around lakes and water activities, boating, river tours in places like Wisconsin Dells. And when algae blooms occur, not only are they foul smelling and not appealing to look at, but the toxic ones prevent people from going in the water. So that has had an impact on Wisconsin's tourism. The algae blooms can also be um, dangerous to the ecological environment of lakes and rivers. They can change it by causing other aquatic plants and fish to die off, or in some cases, the fish will migrate to different locations. But either way, not always a good thing for the environment. Um, and because not all algae produce toxins, how do we identify the toxic ones? Well, often the toxic ones are going to be either like a bright bluish green color, hence where the blue green algae term comes from. Red, brown, or even white colored algae are a sign of toxic algae in the water. Sometimes you'll see water that almost looks like a pea soup consistency. That is toxic algae. Water that is topped with like a gray and green decaying algae should definitely be avoided because that's a sign that it is toxic and you can come in contact with the toxins. The water often will look like it has a layer of paint on top of it. So in any of those instances, you're going to want to avoid the water. You can actually report it to um, an agency in Wisconsin. Uh, they are keeping track of when and where all the different algae blooms occur. So what is causing the algae blooms in Wisconsin to increase? Um, in recent years, Wisconsin's weather has been getting warmer, wetter, and we've been having longer growing seasons. A study done showed that our weather since the 1950s has been getting slightly warmer every year. Um, as far as getting wetter, we've been having rainstorms that not necessarily are producing more rain, but heavier rains all at one time, which is contributing to erosion issues, which contribute to the runoff issues. Invasive species that have been introduced into our lakes and rivers are also contributing to the increase in algae blooms. Um, Certain invasive species, like some of the carp species, they actually they rip out and dig up plants on the bottom of lake beds, which causes um, other aquatic plants to die from the cloudiness of the lakes not allowing sunlight through. So plants aren't getting the sufficient sunlight to grow. Those plants fight with the algae over nutrients in the water. So if those plants are not there, basically the algae just gets all the nutrients, and then that causes them to grow quite rapidly. Other invasive species, such as certain mussel species, not only provide a living environment for algae to attach to. They will attach to the shells of the mussels, but they also uh, provide extra phosphorus into water through their excretions. Phosphorus is a key nutrient for algae to grow, and just a slight increase in phosphorus will enable the algae to grow at a rapid rate. Um, there's also been an increase in phosphorus just in general in Wisconsin's lakes and rivers. The biggest source of phosphorus is from fertilizers and manure that is being spread on farmers' fields and our lawns. Uh, when it rains, these fertilizers get washed away into our lakes and rivers. One of the biggest problems for scientists is they have no way of knowing where an algae bloom will occur. And when an algae bloom does occur, they don't have a way to predict, is that algae bloom going to be toxic or not? And fighting fighting these algae blooms has proved problematic because once a bloom is there, it's hard to just get rid of it. By dumping chemicals on the algae bloom, which essentially would kill it, you're also putting toxins in the water that'll kill the other aquatic life, and um, we don't want that to happen. That defeats the purpose of getting rid of the algae blooms. So it's been kind of problematic for the government and scientists to figure out how to specifically fight the algae blooms. Um, so they're focusing more on prevention of the algae blooms instead of fighting them as they occur. The Wisconsin Department of Health created the Wisconsin Harmful Algae Blooms program. The program was started to help identify algae blooms, report algae blooms, and evaluate them. So you as a citizen, if you encounter an algae bloom and you're not sure if it's toxic or not, you can report it to the Wisconsin Harmful Algae Blooms program, and they will go out and evaluate it and run tests and decide if it is toxic or not. Some places, such as Marathon County, have implemented um, erosion prevention plans. These plans are put in place to help prevent the erosion runoff into lakes and rivers. And whereas the program is not implemented primarily for the purpose of preventing algae blooms in the lakes and rivers, that is one of their reasons for implementing the program. Studies show that when you have grass, like heavy grass fields versus like a cornfield where there's lots of open dirt, the grass fields prevent some of the erosion. So in Marathon County, they've started a program where farmers that switch over to grazing their cattle instead of corn feeding their cattle are getting um, like tax breaks or subsidies for switching over, because by switching over to grazing, they are helping to prevent the erosion. Another thing to help prevent is just as citizens to stop using fertilizers um, on our yards and our fields, especially fertilizers that are heavy in phosphorus and nitrogen. Uh, Residents can also help by preventing yard debris from ending up into storm drains. Yard debris is a big thing that helps carry those fertilizers into our lakes. So by raking your yards regularly and just bagging up your debris instead of blowing it aside, leaf blowers and blowing your leaves into the streets is very bad for the prevention of phosphorus ending up in our lakes. Another thing is people who live on shorelines can help by planting. They're called plant buffers, and it's you want to take native plant species to the area, and you plant the buffer along the shoreline, and then when it rains, these plants help filter out the runoff as it flows into the lakes and rivers. So the phosphorus stays with the plant buffer and not into the lakes and rivers. Scientists are still working on coming up with more ways to prevent this. Obviously, we can't prevent climate change. The climate is going to change whether we want it to or not. As a society, we can help slow that down, but we cannot prevent that. So, really, as citizens, we need to work together to help prevent the amount of phosphorus that's ending up in our lakes and rivers if we want to cut back on the amount of algae blooms that are occurring every year. Thank you.